Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast, where we demystify the creative process and exchange ideas with career-minded artists. We are your hosts, Adriana May and
Jackie Sanders. We're two emerging artists sharing forth the advice and business lessons we have learned along our journey. So if you're not already, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we launch a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we are so excited because we have a guest on the podcast. Natalie Daise is a visionary artist whose art arises from the tradition of storytelling. Born in central New York, she came home to South Carolina in 1983. She earned her bachelor's degree from Vermont College and a master's in creative studies from Union Institute and University. Best known as Miss Natalie on Nick Jr.'s award-winning television program, Gula Gula Island, Natalie is committed to creating art experiences that entertain, educate, empower, and inspire creativity at museums, theaters, conferences, and educational institutions across the country. She uses the creative process, storytelling, and art making to support and stimulate active problem solving, building community, making connections, embracing diversity, and improving business to enhance the quality life of others. So thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us on today's podcast episode.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are more than delighted that you're here with us. You and I met in person in South Carolina. We were both jurors for Art Fields Jr. So that was quite the amazing experience.
Wow.
To be tapped on the shoulder, wasn't it?
It was really impressive. The work was just really impressive.
I know. It was, 267 pieces of art?
Was it?
Every day?
It probably felt like
that first night I was stretched out on the floor of the gallery all alone staring at I'm going, oh my God. Yeah.
Well, and especially when we got, without going into the weeds, but it was like elementary and primary were relatively easy. Middle school was a little more challenging, but high school, there was so much work. It looked like it was adults that had been doing it for a very long time. It was
things
excellent.
I could learn from, really impressive work.
Yeah, no, and I was really grateful to have your insight too, since you were helping me identify which ones were possibly from art magnet schools and give it a little more context as, it's not just the technique, it's also some of the story behind it. So that was great. That alongside
it sounded like an amazing experience. And especially like you were saying, Natalie, of like, you can really learn from all ages of artists, which I think is so cool as an educator yourself and a fellow artist, being connected to so many different communities, which is one of the questions I was most interested in of how did visual and performing art come into your life? Like which one came first and how do you feel like they influence each other today creatively?
From this point, I can say that probably the visual art came first. I was the quiet kind of shy kid, but I remember drawing in kindergarten and seeing things different than the other kids did. People are doing the horse and I was like, well, it looks like this. And so I was doing that, though I don't think I called myself an artist, though I was sometimes told I was artistic. So she's artistic, she's creative, but I didn't think of myself as an artist because it certainly wasn't a career thing. You could be creative and artistic, then you needed to do something like growing up an adult when you grew up. So, but I think that's the first thing that I remember doing. I became a storyteller as an adult. Well, I probably was born into that as well, but I didn't call myself. I called myself that first. And I began professional storytelling in the early 80s with my husband and partner. And it wasn't until after doing television and coming back home that I opened a studio on St. Helena Island in Beaufort. We bought this property. We were going to turn it into this like interactive Gullah culture space for kids, but there was an old house on it and we weren't ready. We didn't have the money to develop it. So I took the house and turned it into installation. The house itself is like this installation with driftwood trees and painted walls and painted floors. And then I just like, well, we can use it until it becomes something else. And so I just started doing art workshops and play and reconnected with that part of myself. So that when I started showing work, folk were like, I didn't know you were an artist. And I was like, well, I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important too, as a reminder. We talk about that a lot on the podcast of you can be an artist, even if you feel like you're not actively presenting work, or even if you're not actively making work, you're always an artist at your core. And it shows in different parts of your being, different parts of your professional life at different phases in different ways. And so I'm curious with both the work that you make, but then also your involvement with television. How did that opportunity to be on TV come about, and your journey into storytelling to the masses on television?
I always say it was just grace. My husband and I started doing professional storytelling, like I said, in the early 80s. And that was just a sort of, he had written a book. My husband's a writer. And it was a book, oral histories collected from folk he knew on the island, St. Helena Island, where he grew up. And then he scripted the book and said, hey, let's do it like this. And here, you tell this story. And I was like, oh, and it felt good. So we just sort of got tapped into, like the educational market, we're going to schools and we're doing things in museums, telling stories and singing songs. And we've been doing that for a while. When I met another writer, Gloria Naylor, who was having one of her novels optioned as a movie. And she said, come to dinner with her and some friends out on the island. And her friends turned out to be Lawrence Fishburne and Maria Perez Brown. And they were scouting for the movie.
Oh.
And we were just there. I'm pregnant. I have a toddler. And we started talking about kids, what kids watch. And Maria said, Nickelodeon's trying to diversify. And I've been pitching shows. Gloria says, you guys are like storytellers. Maybe we could do a show about you. And that's how it started. We didn't have an agent. We didn't have a manager. We weren't trying to do TV. We were eating cold chicken on the island. And that's kind of how it happened. A few months later, half a year later, we went to New York with my newborn. He threw up on one of the VPs at Nickelodeon.
Oh my goodness. So
we had a show approval by the end of the day.
They're like, oh, wow, you really do know how to deal with kids. You're right in the thick of motherhood.
So. I was right. And actually at the time, hardly any of the people who were there working at Nick had kids. We had kids.
That's crazy. I feel like that's such a immense value that you bring, because you know what kids want to watch. Because you're like, we're in the thick of it. We're watching these shows every day with our newborn and toddler. Then years later, you're like, we know what's out there. And then positioning yourself in that market is so cool.
Well, I felt positioned in the market as opposed to positioning ourselves in the market. Because that hadn't been our intent. We weren't like, I know what we need to do. We need to position ourselves in the early childhood education television market.
Right.
But honestly, if you think about it, in many ways, pitching, whether it's executives or a collector, that's sales, and sales is storytelling. So technically, all you have to do is basically make your case in a compelling way. And how could they say no?
I guess so.
Sales is storytelling.
Yeah, we just went and talked about our life. That's what we did. And so there you go. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, that's perfect. That's one of those kind of like the equivalent of artists that just get magically discovered. That's one in a million. So
I guess so. I guess so. But to say that, we weren't just like sitting around in our house.
You were putting in the work too.
We were putting in the work. We had put in years of work. We had been in, we had performed before hundreds of thousands of children by then. We had been in the schools. We had seen what happens when they turn away or they pay attention. We knew how to work with an audience. And so those were skills that we just developed on the ground.
Yeah. So this was just another performance for you, another storytelling experience.
It was another storytelling experience.
Yeah.
And when we went to New York to talk to them, we weren't even thinking of pitching. We just thought this will be an interesting trip.
It's just a conversation.
Yeah, because we don't know anything about TV, and it's not something we are vested in. We weren't like, oh wow, the golden ring. We were just like, this will be interesting.
Yeah, let's just see what this opportunity might hold, and then whatever happens, great.
Exactly. That's exactly.
I feel like that's a great way to be with any experience in life too. Like, yes, you want to make sure that you show up as prepared as you can be, but also understand there's not one conversation that's make or break forever. There's not one experience that you won or lost that's going to make or break forever. Everything is ever evolving. If this opportunity doesn't work out, it was for a reason. If this one falls on your plate, it's for a reason. And
absolutely. That's like concise what my whole, I mean, I'm 61 and that has been what my life has been. It's like, you can prepare. You should always, I mean, you prepare. If a door opens, you've got something to take through the door, but you're not like sitting there staring at the door, this door and this door.
yeah.
You don't know. There's other things. Meanwhile, you're doing what's in front of you to do. And you're exploring the opportunities and the materials that are there.
Right, exactly. And I know we all laugh at that idea of like, you're just staring at the door, but so many of us, so many times you get so focused on one goal that you're like, I just need to hit this right now. And you get so tunnel visioned, which tunnel vision and focus and discipline can be good sometimes. But yeah, there's other times you're like, you don't see these 4 open doors right next to you because you're just focused on this one closed one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how it's worked. That's how it's worked for me. And, you know, I know sometimes that seems counterintuitive to, you know, being raised with that, get that idea, go out there, do it, make it happen.
Yeah.
And, my life has not worked that way.
It's not linear.
No, nothing's been linear. And I wouldn't say you don't have a plan. Of course you have a plan, maybe.
A rough outline.
But it's not in stone. It's like, don't make it in stone, honey. Put it on paper. Because
now, you were working on television, right? Were you making art at the same time, like on the side? Like, okay, so we have a show, because I imagine there's probably gaps in between, like the different performance gigs, if we can call them that. I don't know if that's the proper term, but in between the different projects, performance projects, there's probably some gaps in them. Is that where you were doing like the visual art? Or?
I was not. Okay. I was doing performing art and I was raising children. Okay. And the other thing I was doing, which I realized in retrospect, it looked like I was really domestic. I was not. But part of my creative process was, I've made matching Christmas sweaters for everybody in the house. I got up this morning and made 10 loaves of bread in different types. I've sewed all the shirts and outfits that my husband and I wear on stage. I've painted the furniture in all my kids' rooms and done murals on the closet door. I wasn't thinking of it as, that's what I was doing. And so, you know, it may have fooled people into thinking that I was just highly domestic. I am not.
You were just finding different creative outlets to survive, so to speak. Yes. But once you're creative, you can try to contain it, but it's going to come out somewhere. So whether it's in more of a craft or just a creative endeavor, or just like you said, if you were painting on their closet doors, little murals and things, well, you were still finding a way to let it out. Now, as the evolution obviously carries through, and you're going from doing some things on the house, when did you make that change to say, okay, that's it. This stuff on the side is really cool, but I actually want to make this a more significant part of what my creative career looks like? Like, when do you say, you know, that's it, I'm an artist with a capital A. Let's pursue
that honestly didn't happen. That's only been, I'm sorry, I just realized I hadn't cleaned that brush and I like that brush. I was like, oh no. That did not happen until relatively recently. We finished TV right around 2000. I opened that workshop on St. Helena Island. Yep. And I considered myself a crafter. I did functional painting. I did functional furniture, you know, chairs and things, build and paint these things that you can use, and so that justifies their existence. I did that for about 4 years. And then when I closed that studio, you know, ceramics, there's a kiln out back, there's a bead room, we're making jewelry. It's all doing, but I didn't call it art. But when that closed, I still had that need. And so eventually I moved into a space like you're in, an artist co-op. I had a little studio in there, and I couldn't do furniture because it was small, so it went up on the wall. It was like, oh, okay.
2D, here we go.
Yeah, I started doing that. It was about 2008
Wow.
that I began, maybe 10, that I began to do that. And I didn't start showing that work until like about 2010.
Oh, wow. Now, could you quickly, being that it's a podcast, some people are going to see this on YouTube, but for folks that may be listening to this on their car, could you describe for people that have never seen your art before what it looks like? Like, how would you describe it to someone that hasn't seen it?
Good question. Well, the work I'm doing now, we're artists, it evolves. So it's different than the work I was doing in 2010 or 2008. It is representational. It is a very narrative in that it comes from the storytelling tradition. It is brown people in all of our various shades of beauty. It is a lot of nature and natural things, particularly collard greens and other things that are familiar to the Southeast and the Low Country of South Carolina, to the African American experience. So you will see a lot of greenery, a lot of plants. You might see bees. You'll see things that are influenced from my backyard. I did a portrait of Harriet Tubman called St. Harriet in My Backyard. And you see the bottle tree that I have in my yard. You see the chickadees that are flying around my yard, and yellow roses and hibiscus. And so that kind of stuff just makes its way into my work. Occasionally there are historic figures like Harriet. My most common muse is my daughter, Sarah, who just left a minute ago. My son, Simeon, has shown up in my work. My family, people I care about, they were the people, when my work began to change and become more representational, it was the people who I knew and loved who showed up on the canvas more often than not. Though, it's not always the case. And I'll do a piece and I'll have people say, that looks like my daughter, sister, grandson, because I think that the spirit of the person I've painted is evident in the work that I'm doing, and that transcends the actual body of the model or the, person that sat for me or whose photos I used.
That's beautiful, because it's basically like you're finding yourself represented in it, and it might be the memory of someone that maybe you haven't seen, but there's something in common. Like I may see at one of your figures and go, that reminds me of one of my grandmothers, and I haven't seen her since I was a little girl, but there's something in the portrait itself. Maybe it's the eyes, maybe it's the voice, there's something in it that resonates. So I imagine for people, that's a lot of what could be happening, where they're like, it just reminds me of, and it might not be, again, that they look identical, but they're either identifying themselves in it or somebody that then they know. They seem to be reflected. That's beautiful. That's
what storytelling is. When I'm on a stage and I'm storytelling, that's it. It's that place where you're telling a story and people resonate with what they recognize as true. And so that's also in my visual work.
Yeah, I love that. I don't remember where I read this, but it basically said for your art to be authentic, your story has to be so personal that it's universal.
I love that. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, so it's like you could be talking about something happy or sad or trauma or your family history, but if you're portraying yourself so, like if the story is so personal as you put it through the canvas, through your art, whatever your medium is, it's almost like somebody else can see it reflected on their side too, which I think is, I don't know, that's one of the magic parts without going woo-woo there. I'm like, that's one of the magic parts.
I love that. That resonates as such a truth with me. I like that. I haven't heard that, but I know that when I step on a stage, when there's an audience full of people, that is the thing, that I never step on as anything other than myself. I don't have a storytelling persona per se. I'm as vulnerable as I can safely be in a space. And that is the thing that connects with the people who are there, regardless of who they are and where they come from. Not everybody, but
Of course.
Yeah, I think that's what makes your energy, and whether it's a public speaking event or your physical artwork itself, I think that's what does make it connect with so many people, because especially as artists, I feel like that's the most authentic way that we can be artists, is to be as authentic and genuine to ourselves and our ideas and our history as possible. Because some people may try to fake it or have a more tailored, curated story, or like you were saying earlier with, oh, well, this is what is going to do well on TV. You never went into it with that mindset. You were just being yourself, and it just happened to be the right fit.
Yeah.
Because people can tell when you're being inauthentic in those ways.
Yeah.
So when you're speaking to people or making artwork, what do you find that is the most fulfilling part of being an artist?
Ooh, okay. That wasn't on your piece of paper. The most fulfilling part of being an artist is, I think, actually the fact that it is one of the times when I am fully present. I mean, it doesn't mean that sometimes voices aren't there, like trying to pull me away from being present. Oh my God, this is shit. What are you doing? But for the most part, you kind of have to be here. I consider it, I say that this is my sacred practice. You are in my chapel right now. So to be able to, I won't call it magic. We know that there's skill and there's training and there's all this stuff that goes into the making of art. But I will say that you can have all the skills and have taken all the classes and done that and still not had
soul.
Yeah, thank you. And it can still be empty. It can be technically perfect. My work is not technically perfect because I haven't had training as an artist. And for a long time, when I first began, moving up on the wall, I was very insecure about that. There'd be people who saying, well, I remember being in that same co-op with some artists who were in there who were like, well, so-and-so says they're an artist and they've never even done X. And I'm like, oh, I never done X either. I don't even know what X is. What I know is that I feel this thing about my dad. And I got this paper and these scissors and this paint, and I'm gonna try to tell that story. That's what I know. So it took me a while to get past that thing that I should have had the validation of an academic validation to be an artist. And now I know, of course, that, one, I was born, as you said, you're an artist if you're making art or not, but if you are making art, you most certainly are. And I didn't need someone to give me permission to do it.
I completely understand. I come from a self-taught background as well. I went to business school, not art school, even though that's what I wanted. So I also felt that same kind of like imposter syndrome of like, who do I think I am? Why would I charge more than $20 for a painting? You know what I mean? Like, am I just a crafty person? And the answer is no. Like, I've done crafts, I've done fine craft, I've done just Pinterest tutorials or YouTube. Who cares? It's kind of like what, echoing in what you were saying, it's kind of like, is that storytelling, is that narrative that's coming through your art, whether it's representative or abstract, is it true to you? And that's really what matters. And even if your technique's not there yet, it'll still come across. So it works out. But
when you do it, the technique, you develop your own technique.
Yeah, you do. And I also like how you mentioned the importance of how having or being surrounded by other artists helped you with gaining some of that confidence, or at least learning the lingo, if you will. At least it helped me.
Yeah.
In a place surrounded by other artists, professionally trained or not, but being able to say like, oh, I think I hate this, or I'm not sure about this, and having another artist say, well, I understand where you're coming from. Maybe like the values a little bit here or the contrast there, like, gentle, but at the same time be able to say, but actually like the way the colors were blended here and things like that. Just those little things that it's not that you need the external validation. However, at least in my experience, it was positive to have that kind of feedback, constructive critique, if you will, to get past some of my own roadblocks. How about you? Did it help you when you moved into that co-op?
It did. It did, not just because of that, but also just the energy of creativity. And this funny thing that happens, for my first studio space in there was a larger one. So I shared it with a woman who was a poet. So she was writing and I was painting. And then we did this, everybody did like the show from everybody in the thing. And you would have thought that when you saw our work, her poetry and my painting, that we had been collaborating, that my painting was, but we hadn't, but just the energy of being in the space.
Yeah.
Kind of created this kind of synergy of our work. And the other thing, like you say, which is really great about being around other artists and creatives, is that you see there's so many ways to be creative.
Definitely.
And, I go to shows. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that we talk about a lot between ourselves, other artists that we have studios next to, and on the podcast, is that idea of community over competition. I feel like being fully immersed in a physical space like that, where you can almost, if you're on your own making your artwork, you can build up this idea sometimes of, oh, well, I need to get ahead, or I need to hit XYZ milestones, like you were saying, to be a quote unquote real artist. But I feel like the more you become an artist, the more you realize how untrue that mindset is. And it truly is about collaboration and community. And there's such a range of styles, yet alone, even within abstract art or even within poetry, there's so many different specialties and ways that people can shine on their own, that it doesn't bring you down. And really physically being in a space like you were and like we are, where you're wall to wall sharing, or maybe even in the same studio sharing a space with another creative energy, it just shows how powerful that collaboration can be and how you can influence each other even when you don't know you're intentionally doing it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I have been influenced by other artists, sometimes just hearing something someone has said that has me thinking about my own work differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can trigger just different ideas, and whether it's visual or not. I mean, I feel like sometimes it's like I'll see someone and they'll be like, how'd you do that texture? I'm really huge into texture. So I'll be like, how did you do that? And then I'll share from my end to, oh, I use this, oh, I use that. And then you just end up like, oh, do you have this medium? Actually, yes, I do. You want to try it? Like, it's just, I don't know. That community is just so powerful, which I mean, I was in corporate for a long time and it's not quite that. So the way that things are shared in the artistic community, I mean, it's just, there's no comparison. But
yeah, I've had wonderful support. Wonderful artists who just shared stuff with me. It's made such a difference for me.
Yeah, it does. And it just adds up, it just tallies up. But speaking of, sharing and, I mean, we're big believers in sharing forward what we've learned. I mean, that's one of our maxims, so to speak. How would you define generosity as an artist, or what does generosity mean to you?
I think it is just that opening, that willingness to share, that willingness to basically the willingness to share. I've had, there's a woman, her name is Arian King Calmer. She's a textile artist out of Charleston. She has been for a long time. She's in her, I don't know, early mid 70s now. And I always said about Arian that she never goes through a door she doesn't hold open. She would make opportunities for others. She'd say, like for me, when I first began like showing my work, and she said to me, when did you start doing this? And I was like, well, I forgot. And she would say, there's a group show, I'm going to get you invited. Or, let me tell you about this. And then there's another wonderful artist out of Savannah. And I remember going into her gallery and she was telling me, oh, hey, here's where I get prints made. Here's how I do this. Here's how I do pricing. And they just offered it. They didn't see it. It wasn't competition. It was sharing. And so I try to do that as well, to be open about my processes. Sometimes it's as simple as of listening and say, here, oh, hey, let's try this. Or I don't know how to get prints. Oh, I know, I'll let you know. I think that's just being generous.
Yeah, definitely. We've had those same experiences too, which is incredible. I feel like when you have other people that are mentoring you in your creative process, it almost seems counterintuitive to think of not doing that to other people. You're like, so many people opened doors for me. So many people shared links to products, or what website did you order this thing from? So of course you're going to share forward to other people, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I saw that you also lead more formal, in addition to relationships with other artists, you do art workshops as well, and your public speaking, which I'm sure has influenced and helped so many artists. So is that where a lot of that came from, of just the generosity of sharing it forward with other artists? And what kind of workshops and public speaking do you do now?
Wow, that's evolving. That's evolving. With COVID, a lot of that kind of thing stopped. And
Yeah.
I have been rethinking how to do like creativity workshops. I did in the fall of last year, 40 days to creative practice, which I did a Zoom for 40 days every morning, 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. every day.
Oh, wow.
With
That's amazing.
I did it with my Patreon, and I said, you could be a $5 a month patron, and we're going to do this. And so we were exploring creative practice and how do we develop our own practices. And so that was really cool. And it was different than being in the space together. And I learned so much just by what was happening, just by our exchange of information. When I was like, okay, now let's try to focus on this. And I could feel my group go, I was like, oh, okay, so let's talk about what happened just now. What was that? Was that the word focus? What did that mean to you? And so I learned so much. And they, some of them still, they said they developed a practice that they can take throughout their creative work. Who knows what medium they're working in? It could be word. It could be, sculpture. I don't know. It could be the kitchen, could be gardening. I don't know what your medium of creativity is, but that was very cool. And so that's really the only workshop I've done now since COVID. Before I did stuff like, I still call them creativity workshops, where let's go and, let's learn about what the creative process, and then let's apply it to something. And initially it was with the idea of, we're going to do a project using what we know about creative practice. I don't know if I'll do that in the future. I might, but I really am more interested in us all sharing an experience of process. And so I've been playing with that. And so I don't know. I don't know, y'all, what I'm gonna be when I grow up. We'll see. In terms of public speaking, it's a whole different thing. I talk about a lot of different things, but the last panel I was on sacred spaces. And to me, creativity and sacred spaces are like that.
Okay. So workshops, evolution in progress, to be continued, to be determined.
Right. But I do speak.
Maybe it'll end up being a combination of things.
Yeah. I do a lot of still speaking. And so I speak about creative process. I speak about art as problem solving.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. And whenever I feel like encounter people who are like STEM art, I'm like, are you kidding? The scientific process and the creative artistic process are exactly the same.
Yeah, you create a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you challenge it, figure out what variables there are. Like that's
it. That's what we're doing every day. That's what I was doing today. I still have paint on my hands. Coming down to the last panel of a book project I'm doing, and I was like, will this work? Will this work? Will this work? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take several different ideas of this one. I'm going to send them all to the editor, to the creative team. They're going to give me some feedback. I'm going to make some changes. That's what I'm doing. Will this work? I don't know. Let's try it.
Question for you.
Yeah.
So I know you've had years of experience, but still it could help. I know you're talking about art workshops, public speaking. For some artists that are a little bit more on the shy side, and I think you mentioned at least growing up you were, how did you make that crossover? Do you have any words of wisdom on like how to make that crossover so that those artists that are afraid to raise their voice, so to speak, right, and tell their story can actually do so when they're just afraid to get, I mean, it sounds amazing, but public speaking, I mean, a lot of us suffer from stage fright. I can be in front of like 10 people and I'm okay, but make that 100 people and I'm like, my knees are knocking, just saying.
Mine were too. I remember like trying to make sure I stand so they couldn't see my legs shaking. And now it's not a problem. So, but one of it was just a matter of practice and exposure. But the other part, I think, was authenticity. So when I would speak to people, I was speaking from this real place. So, like I'm talking to you guys right now, that's not scary. And so to say, basically, I'm going to tell you something that's true about me. And the true thing might be, well, right now I'm really scared. Right now I'm really nervous. I'm talking to you about this because this is important to me. I want to tell you something that's important to me. And that helps. And then it's really just the practice. Here's a workshop that I have been playing with in the back of my head for like 4 years now. It's called Storytelling for Introverts.
Nice.
I had actually planned to do a workshop like that, and then the world all kind of happened. It's like, how do we do that? And when I have done story workshops, sometimes with like church groups, we'll get down one-on-one and I'll ask a simple question. Tell someone, the person across from you, a story from when you were 10. Just do that. And, that's like, I'm accessing a memory. When I was 10, I was riding my bike, and then, I saw a possum and I got scared and I went over the ditch, and then I was bleeding, and then I limped home, and then my mom. And that's the kind of story you can tell because it's taking you back to a real experience. And it shares something about you that's made you a little more open. So I normally start with let's start with a little story. Let's just start with a little story. Tell me about your day. Tell me about the thing that happened today that surprised you. That kind of thing. And it is less like, now I must reveal my heart to the world. Like, yeah.
Vulnerability.
Right. What did you have for breakfast? Why did you choose that? Wow. Did your dad fix that for you? How do you, that kind of thing. But everybody doesn't have to be who they're not. But it's easier, I think, when you're just sharing a little piece about yourself. And for me, I can do it. I can have 1,000 people and I'm cool, but I couldn't always. I would always also decide who I was talking to and talk to them. A little easier.
Yeah, almost like create one person in your mind, like this kind of artist, this introverted artist that needs to hear these things. And so whether you're talking to 50 people that are in your mind just like that, or 1,000, you're just talking to that one type of person.
That was something I did. And I was just recently did an interview that was just online. I was explaining to the guy about television. We got there and there's camera crews, all these cameras. And we had been telling stories in audiences where you could look into people's faces. And I was just like, and so the story I told myself was that I was looking, that the camera was a window. And I knew the person on the other side of the window. So I could talk. So if you ever saw the TV show I used to do, I always broke the fourth wall.
Yeah.
I'm the character who always talked to the fourth wall. And I could do it because I knew the kid on the other side of the window. As opposed to, I am now going to address millions of people. Oh my God.
Right.
Now. I remember once going up to the director's space, and you know how you've seen, if you've ever been in this studio, they've got all these screens and all the camera shots. And I went up and I was like, oh my God, they're all looking at me. They can see if there's something in my nose. I almost couldn't work.
Yeah. This one's from the left side. This one's from the right side. This one zoomed in right on your eyes. This one is looking at your lips. And you're like, oh goodness.
Even now I feel that sense of like, so I was like, let's try to forget we were up here. I never went back up in there. And I know the kid on the other side of the window, and I can talk to that kid. And I don't have to try hard to talk to that kid because I know him. It's Mikey. He lives behind us, So that was it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you feel like you do that with your artwork as well? Or do you find that that's maybe more of a personal experience that then whoever the viewer is, they bring to the surface? Or do you feel like you're wanting to speak to a specific person with the physical work that you make?
I don't think I'm trying to speak to a specific person. They are. That was always the challenge, when we talk about business. I remember trying to work with this business coach. He's like, who's your audience? I was like, I don't know. Well, you got to pick your audience. Well, I don't know who my audience is. Well, you have to pick one. If you can't focus on your audience, you don't know how to market.
Yeah.
I don't know. They know who they are. And so for me, that was always really a challenge, targeted marketing kind of thing. I don't know. I know that I painted this story and somebody resonated with it. And I've noticed it depends. For example, people who interact with my art on Instagram are very, very different.
Yeah.
You might have interacted with it on Facebook, and very, very different than the people who will show up at a gallery show.
Yeah.
And I accept that. And to me, that's the part like, well, that's interesting. I'm really always walking around like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I know that there'll be folks who say do it differently, but I'm doing it the way I've done it. I'm open to change and evolution always. I'm learning from what happens. And I won't say that I'm then focusing on like, oh, this looks like it's my audience now, and I'm focusing on that. I'm not really. Let's talk about complete, utterly selfishness. I'm focusing on doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
Well, and that's okay too, because it's like a lot of artists are more process oriented anyways, as opposed to being so focused on this outcome has to look exactly this way for exactly this audience, which is fine for those that do it that way. But it sounds like you're like, no, I have this story and I have to tell it, and I'm going to tell it through this painting. And I'm still going to put myself out there because obviously you're still doing that.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in the people that resonate on it at a personal level as opposed to I want this because it matches above my couch. Like that's not
right.
That's a different type of strategy, if you will.
Yeah. Which means, designers might not want to work with me, but.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you have someone that does pet portraits, for example, well, their target market's easy. Anybody with a pet, especially if they specialize. I only do dogs. Well, then you talk to dog owners. That's very different from what you're doing, where you're like, I have this extremely personal story, which may or may not be universal. And the people that click with it are my actual collectors. That's my audience. It's the ones that see the message. I like to call it the stories underneath the layers. Those are the ones. I like that. I don't think that's selfish. I think it's necessary, to be honest. I thought it was selfish for the longest time to take that approach, but it's taken time. And you tell me, of course, if you agree or disagree, but I think it's taken time to realize by you being authentic and brave in the message you're putting through that painting, that piece of work, those people that resonate with it, it's almost like they can sense that too. So if you were putting all this hope and happiness and just good vibes, if you want to call it that, through that painting, and they can feel it too, when they have it in their home, they can revive, they can relive that, and maybe have, especially for those that don't think of themselves as artists, but then they can see and go like, wow, look at this, what Natalie did. And it's so beautiful. And it reminds me of my grandma when we were, when I was 10 and we were out in the garden, and now I have this happy memory that resurfaces. So it's a gift. You're giving them a gift. Like it's not buy this thing. There's so much more. It's beautiful.
I mean, I'd love it if they do. But I was at I did a duo. My favorite thing is when I get to do all the things. So I was at a university, Francis Marion University, and that night I did a performance with my daughter and also a dancer. We created a storytelling presentation with music and dance. And the next day I did gallery talks because I had my show. My show was up. And what was so cool was that morning I had breakfast with the professor who, after having listened to me tell stories and looked at my art, and we were talking about sacred things, he started telling me about how his grandmother always had like a little something by her chair with a flower that she would clip from her garden. And how listening to me reminded him of being the little boy who walked in and there was always a little flower from the yard in something, a pill bottle, a small vase. And that he shared that with me. And that my telling and my art brought him to that place. I mean, that's good stuff. that's as important as the things that we think of as big things, you know? It is a big thing. So I think a lot of it, you know, I mentioned sacred, is about rediscovering the sacred in the work, in the life, in your own life, to look at something and rediscover that thing. And I don't know why I'm stabbing my finger, but it just feels like that.
Just feels right. Just
Yeah,
go
the
with
spark, like the spark or something. Yeah, yeah. I don't think I've ever done that before, but it just felt like
It makes you feel alive.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I love that. And I love that power of storytelling with the visual artwork in itself, because you're so right. Like sometimes the visual outlet may feel like the right approach to sharing a story or a message. Sometimes a poem or a spoken word piece or a story might feel like the right avenue in which to share a story or a message. And oftentimes, just like your experience with that professor, like they fuel each other if you are being your most genuine, authentic self, because every part of your being is being given into both mediums, and therefore they also strengthen each other too.
yeah. That's good. That's good. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. So how do you find that you balance that time between making the work and mentoring other artists, or maybe within different art forms? How do you find that balance, or maybe what are some struggles or tricks that you found for keeping that balance to fuel your own energy levels?
I don't know. I don't know.
Fair enough.
I have, you know, over the last couple of years, because all of us were going through things, I did a lot more of this in inner work, studio, in my space work. So it's I think when you ask the question, how do you balance? It seems almost like a question of intentionality. I'm going to balance this like this with that. And I don't know that it is that. I trust the instinct at the time. There are a lot of people who reach out to me that I don't engage because I know I don't have the energy for it, because I need the energy in my actual creative work and space. And so basically I just go by that. And so when Adriana sent me a link to do this, I looked and said, I like Adriana. And I like, this seems like a really nice idea. And so I'm going to say yes. But I don't always, because at this point in my life, it is very easy for all of my energy to go out. And that leaves me with less to do my work. And doing my work is very, very important to me. So when I take a speaking engagement or a performance engagement, I balance. I don't know if I say I balance it. I look at what my visual artwork load is, and what my visual artwork needs are, and I make that decision. I used to do a lot more. I used to say yes more. And it's very hard for me not to say yes, because I very much like, this will make you happy. I love to make you happy. But you guys are artists, so you know how there's like so many things you want to do, so many ideas. I sometimes say it's like, if it was like a file cabinet, it goes all the way back with all the work that I want to do, that I'm like, oh, what now? Oh, and I have to treat that as a priority in my life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel it out. And sometimes I just look at the calendar and go, nah, because what I cannot do is like have every day be going out.
Exactly.
I just can't. Or I choose not to.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking of it, of like, okay, is this activity giving me energy and fueling me, or is this putting energy out into the world? And both are positive experiences and can be, but you need to understand that they need to balance each other out, whether it's what you're receiving or what you're giving to others.
Absolutely. So
time to recharge the batteries.
Yes. And that means I have to sometimes decide that, I have to say no. Not because you're not wonderful, or not because it's not viable or valuable, just because Yeah, I just now I changed it yesterday. I changed the flight reservation. I had planned when I finished this book. I'm like 2 weeks with my friend on the West Coast. It's going to be so cool. We're going to hang out. She's like, we're throwing a tea party. And then an opportunity to show some of my 3D stuff came up, and I looked at it and I said, I cannot be away from my studio for 2 weeks. I can't.
Yeah.
And so I changed it to 1 week. It's like a 1 week away. Listen, I used to travel to do storytelling art residencies in my van with my easel and my paints and all this. I would do it Airbnb. I'd rent a house.
Oh.
I set up everything, bring plastic if the floors weren't right, put it down so that when I finished my storytelling or my performance, I would come back and paint in the evenings.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Just take the studio on the road, essentially.
I would just take it with me. Hopefully.
And on top of that, because you were getting paid for your public speaking engagements, it's almost like you were doing your own residencies.
Exactly. I loved it when I could get like a cool Airbnb. I got this one with this great back porch. I was like, I laid out some plastic. I bought it. I had a shower curtain. I set up my easel. I put up my paints. It was wonderful. I was done because it was like, primary schools or something. I was done by 3.
You just could paint the rest of the day.
I just painted the rest of the day. I did some really great work on the road.
Oh my goodness, that is excellent. Okay. All right. Question for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like a lot of it has to do with that, like you said, intentionality of making the time and what kind of message you want to portray, right, through your artwork. So I think that probably answers this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. How do you personally define success as an artist?
I might have 2 metrics. One
right.
is, do you make the work? Are you doing the work? Is the work impactful? And for me, yes, that I'm a successful artist. The other is the more commercial thing of, am I able to pay my rent and eat, groceries and put gas in the car with my work? So there are just 2 different pieces. And so what I started to do, because I found myself, if I take that piece into the studio, it stifles my work.
Yes.
If I come in the studio thinking about whether it can sell, it impacts my ability to create the work I want to do. And so what I developed, and this is just really in the last year when I was doing that creativity work, was the idea of, I grew up in a very religious home. And so there was a story about, there was this temple, and it was the holy place and the most holy place. And in one part of the temple, like, you could do sales and do whatever you had to do, but in the holy place, you didn't do that. So I have to really have a division here between my creative process and my commercial process. And I cannot allow too much of that. Like my son, who's always like, he'll come in the studio sometimes like, how much do you think you're going to charge for that? And I'm like, you have to go,
You're like, I don't need that energy in my sacred space. That's for a later thought process.
Yeah, that's for the courtyard.
Yeah.
The sales happen in the courtyard. Here, what has to happen is I have to be completely open to this. So there's those 2 aspects. When I am able to be in the sacred space doing this work as I need to do it, that success there. And then when it moves out of this space and into the world, that it finds an audience. And so, those are the 2 metrics that I use for success for me. I am, as I told you when I met you, Adriana, I am a full-time creative. I don't have a backup job. I've only had one job that has ever lasted 5. Longest I ever worked for anybody was almost 5 years. It's like, and when I got that job, my kids were like, "What is this? Like a summer job? Because they weren't used to me."
They're like, "What are you doing?
What are you doing?" And I had a kid in college and trying to get out of high school, and I needed to make sure they had insurance and all that stuff, and I did that. But those are the metrics I use, and you can, they might not be the same anybody else uses.
Oh, those are great.
Yeah, I love those. And so when thinking about your creative journey, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard earlier before you got started on your creative journey?
Wow, because I've been on a creative journey most of my life, it's really challenging to say. I guess I would say that reminded that I am myself and I don't have to do work like anybody else. That comparison, they say comparison is just, deadly. To know at the beginning that if I am true to myself, then that's all I really need. Yes, I'm not saying don't learn, don't grow, don't have experiences, don't take classes, don't, get on YouTube and figure out how to use that kind of paint. But your own unique work is what you are supposed to do. That's it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry that you're not like so-and-so. That guy's great, man, but he's not you. It's okay. Mhm.
Yeah, that definitely resonates because we're big believers, and because in part we have so many emerging artists and new artists or aspiring artists that come through our public facing space because we're open to the public several days a week. That's one thing that we try to impart too is don't compare yourself to others, compare yourself to your own journey and your own evolution. Like that's going to be the real medal, the real test of how you're doing. What's that other saying, Jackie? Fix it, or correct me if I'm wrong. It's something like don't compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. Is that how that one goes? Like, you may be looking at an overnight 10-year success, as they call it. This person has all this thing and it looks like they came out of nowhere. And it's like, no, they've been doing this in their basement, or on the side for 15 years. You just found them now doesn't mean they haven't been doing the work. So, no,
that's people were asking me, like, when did you start doing this? And I'm like, well, 5. I was 5. Following pictures.
They're always lifelong journeys, and that there's always that seed of, okay, what you decided to evolve from. Whether you physically made a piece of artwork in the last 5 years doesn't really hold grounds to your core if you're an artist, if you're creative, if you're a storyteller. Because those start
to make that painting my whole life.
Yeah. And I honestly, truly believe, I'm 61. The work I'm doing now, who knows what it's going to look like at 72? It might be like, yeah, because it's certainly different now than it was in 2004.
Of course. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. Yeah.
Definitely going to keep an eye on, seeing the evolution. But there's a question we like to ask all our guests. It's a fun wrap up, lighthearted at the end. If you had $100 right now, no strings attached, what would you splurge it on or invest it in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Okay, well, I saw that question and I thought about it and I thought a good air dry clay. Because $100, I wouldn't want one that needs a kill because $100 isn't going to get me a kill, but a really good air dry clay that's very workable and doesn't crack easily. I've been doing some research because I have been wanting to build. So that, and if you guys have any recommendations for like a really good one, I would love that.
Okay, I might have to send you a link on something. I have my studio neighbor. She's a sculptor and she uses a type of paper clay that technically does not need to go through a kiln. It can be fired, and obviously, preferably, you'll be fired so that it goes through the vitrification process. I probably butchered that word, but technically, it doesn't have to. So some people let it air dry. So.
I tried like a paper one that was just so pulpy, and I hated the feel.
I don't like the ones that stick to your hands.
Yes. So I'm like. Yeah, that's what I would do. And I would start building. I've been working with gourds lately and carving them. And then I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could build? So yeah.
Well, if I find anything, okay. I'll definitely let you know. But thank you again so much for saying yes. Speaking of things you did say yes to, for joining us today. This has been a delightful conversation. I'm just so happy that you said yes. It was such a great encounter down in South Carolina,
down in Lake City,
where we met, and have the chance to bring you here and impart so many gems of wisdom to so many artists that listen to the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed myself, guys.
Of
Oh,
course.
and oh, sorry, Jackie, go ahead.
I said, where can our listeners find you if they want to stay connected with you, see all these upcoming projects that you have going on? Where can they find you?
Okay, my website, I don't update it nearly enough. I'm almost embarrassed, but it is nataliedaiseart.com, and I really have to update it. And on Instagram, where I interact the most, I'm Gullah Mama, one word, GullahMama. You can find me there. You know, if you Google me, you will find me.
She's around.
But Gullah Mama, Gullah Mama on Instagram is where I interact the most. I don't do Twitter. Though my daughter just told me this morning, she said, you're blowing up on Twitter. And I said, why?
Why? That's like, is it a good or bad?
I know. She just said, someone said, we have to protect Natalie Daise. And I said, protect me from what?
Oh, no.
What do they know that I don't know? But no, I don't go on Twitter. So Instagram.
I love it. I'm not on Twitter either, but maybe I should be, just so I can go on and defend you for hype up all the amazing things that you're doing.
There's stuff I don't need to know.
Again, protecting your energy. Protect your energy.
I don't need to know. So yeah, that's one place. Natalie Daise Art and Gullah Mama. There's also nataliedaise.com, and I basically use that for speaking. Once again, do I upgrade Daise a lot? No, I do not. You can find
That's the never-ending to-do for every artist, pretty much. So you're.
I just want to paint and have good cheeseburgers, and that's what I want, really.
Hey, well, you got it. You can live your best life. Just paint cheeseburgers. The digital stuff looks great.
Thank you. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, we'll link everything in the show notes for this episode if you want to stay connected with us. In between episodes, share what you have learned. So you can follow me on social media. I'm at Amate Art, and
I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Or if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.